All right, so this is the new Wahoo KICKR Core 2, and this one has been a long time coming, updating the original KICKR Core, which came out over 7 years ago, which has definitely been one of the most popular budget direct drive bike trainers ever. So when the original KICKR Core came out, which seems like a lifetime ago, it broke the mold of direct drive bike trainers by offering a solid trainer for under $1,000, which at the time most quality trainers were well over $1,000, but it still provided a good experience, and I'd say it has set a new benchmark for entry-level direct drive bike trainers. And it's gotten even better over time because the price has dropped significantly, as well as adding support for Zwift virtual shifting. So with the new KICKR Core 2, this has some pretty welcome updates all around, and a lot of these updates help it catch up to other budget-friendly offerings that have come out since the original was first launched, like adding Wi-Fi for broader connectivity, as well as some other software-related features, but there's also some changes with the hardware, which addresses some of the few complaints I had about the original. So this new KICKR Core 2 definitely has some pretty big shoes to fill, but the question is this going to be the new default easy button choice when it comes to a budget-level direct drive bike trainer? Well, that's what we're going to talk about in today's video. So I've been riding this KICKR Core 2 for over 3 months now, and in that time I put in over 2,500 kilometers on this thing, so I've definitely put it through its paces. So in this video, I'll be sharing my experience of what I've liked about it, as well as some interesting things I found along the way, as well as how accuracy has fared from day one all the way to 2,500 kilometers later. All right, so first up, let's go ahead and talk about price. So this new KICKR Core 2 is coming in at $549, and there's two different ways that you can purchase this KICKR Core 2. So there's going to be a Zwift cog version right here if you're going to be using Zwift virtual shifting, but they also offer an option with an 11-speed cassette if you want to use your real gears on your bike. And just for context, when the original KICKR Core came out, that was $899, but it did drop in price significantly over time, but it did settle in right around like $500 to $550. But they basically kept the price of the Core 2 about the same as that same lower price. But there actually is one more version of the Core 2 that you can get, and that's going to be with the Zwift Ride frame, and that's going to run $1299 for that whole bundle. And that's going to be the option to get if you want a more permanent setup and you don't necessarily want to use your real bike, or if you have more than one person riding in your household. Now, in terms of which option to get in terms of the 11-speed cassette version of the Core 2 or the Zwift cog version of the Core 2, it basically comes down to if you're going to be using Zwift as a training app or not. So with the Zwift cog version, so this is a single speed cog in the back, and then all the shifting is actually done with these Zwift click controllers right here, where it actually talks to the trainer and kind of like simulates shifting using software magic inside the trainer. And the 11-speed cassette version is going to be the better option if you're not necessarily using Zwift as a training platform, where you'll be shifting using the real gears on your bike. However, if you're using an erg mode based platform, and an example of this would be something like Trainer Road. So what happens here is that the software is actually setting a set resistance to the trainer where you're not doing any shifting at all. You can actually use either version there. But again, if you are using Zwift, I definitely recommend getting the Zwift version. And if you're not, get the 11-speed cassette version. Anyhow, so moving on to the hardware of the new Core 2. So it's actually largely the same trainer, but they've made some nice updates here. And the first of which is the setup process. So there's a little bit of assembly involved, but it's all very straightforward. And you should be able to get up and running in a matter of like 15 minutes or less. So after getting everything out of the box, you'll first need to install the legs on the bottom of the trainer, and they've color-coded the legs as well as added arrows to show you the correct orientation of which way the leg should go. So you'd have to try really, really hard to actually get this wrong. But these new legs are part of what's probably the most noticeable physical upgrade and addresses one of the few complaints I had about the original. And these new legs are now flat versus the round tubes from before, which allows for more surface area for the grippy bits on the bottom. So there's basically less chance of the trainer moving around. It may still move around just a little bit on like smoother surfaces like this hardwood floor right here, but it's definitely better than before. But if you do want a little bit more secure surface, definitely get a trainer mat. And then from there, whether you have the cassette version or the Zwift cog version, so those should already be mounted on the trainer, so you shouldn't have to install those. Now, one thing I wanted to point out is that on the unit that was sent to me, I noticed that there was a little bit of play on the cog and cassette body, and I noticed that the lock nut was a little bit loose right here. So all I had to do was just tighten that down a little bit, and that removed that play. And I'm not sure if that just happened during shipping or something like that, but it maybe is something to check before you install the adapters. And it comes with adapters for most common bikes, whether you have a bike with a quick release or a 142 or 148 millimeter through axle. So for me, I have a 142 millimeter through axle, so I installed the drive side adapter as well as a 142 millimeter adapter for the non-drive side. Now you do have to be careful though with this drive side through axle adapter because it doesn't really lock into place. How do I know this? Well, I took the Core 2 on a road trip, and after I took it out of my car, well, I couldn't find the adapter, so it fell out somewhere. So I went ahead and replaced that with another adapter from another Wahoo trainer. So if you do happen to move your trainer around, just make sure to like secure that with some tape or something like that. And then from there, once you have the necessary adapters installed, just go ahead and remove the rear wheel from your bike and then install it on the trainer. Now, if you have the Zwift cog version, what you want to do is shift your rear derailleur into around the middle of your gear range just to align it with the Zwift cog, and then you can drop your bike into place. And then just go ahead and use the through axle that came with your bike or the quick release that they actually included with the box to actually mount it up. And then once you have your bike mounted, so you also want to adjust the cog itself to fine tune the alignment. And what you'll do there is just rotate the outer ring of the cog until your chain is nicely lined up and as quiet as possible. And I actually have 2 additional tips for you here too. So if you happen to have disc brakes, make sure to put a wedge inside your brakes in case you accidentally press your brake levers. And then related to that, if you happen to have the Zwift cog version, well, you don't necessarily want to accidentally shift with your real shifting either. So if you happen to have electronic shifting, so I went ahead and just removed the battery from my SRAM axis components. And then if you have the Zwift cog version, it's also going to come with these click controllers right here. So you'll just go to want to mount these on your bars, and you can actually mount these in many different locations. So right now I have these mounted on tops right here, but you'd also have it mounted on the inside of your brake hoods right here. Basically, the world's your oyster when it comes to mounting these Zwift click controllers. Now, before we actually get riding, you'll want to pair the Core 2 with the Wahoo app on your smartphone, and there's a few reasons for this. So first off, you want to check for software updates, just to make sure everything is up to date, but another reason is that so you can connect it to your Wi-Fi network, and this is actually one of the upgrades they made with the Core 2 is that it now adds Wi-Fi as a connectivity option in addition to Bluetooth as well as ANT+. And the reason for Wi-Fi is that there can sometimes be interference with Bluetooth signal. So Wi-Fi basically adds an alternative to connect to your training app if you experience Bluetooth connection issues. And then with Bluetooth and ANT+, so this allows you to collect power data on your watch or your bike computer, and basically any watch or bike computer supports either of those protocols. So basically it has connections for like all the things. And then looping back to the app really quick, so another update I wanted to point out here is that there's also a new sensor bridging function. So what this allows you to do is pair an external sensor like heart rate monitor through the trainer itself. And the reason that you may need this is that if you're running your cycling training app on a device that has limited Bluetooth connections, like let's say an Apple TV. So what happens here with that sensor bridging feature is that the heart rate signal is actually going to be sent with the rest of the trainer data to your Apple TV. So that way it's only using one Bluetooth connection instead of numerous. And that brings us to actually getting it set up with the app. So with something like Zwift, when you first launch the app, there's a setup screen here where you want to choose the Core 2 for power. And you'll notice that the Wi-Fi connection here should be the first default if you already have it connected to your Wi-Fi network, but you also can choose from other connection types here like Bluetooth if you'd like. And then from here, you also want to pair up your Zwift Click controllers and just go and press a button on the controllers to wake them up, and then they should just appear in that menu right here. And then lastly, you also want to hook up your heart rate monitor to collect that data. And notice here too is that you also have a couple different options where if you see the little trainer icon, that means that the heart rate data is going to be sent through the trainer. And the Bluetooth signal means that it's just pairing to the Bluetooth strap itself. All right, so when it comes to the ride experience and the ride feel, so this can be broken down into a few different areas. So how it compares to riding outside, how stable it is, how much movement there is, how quiet it is, as well as the experience using Zwift virtual shifting, as well as how it reacts with changes with erg mode-based platforms. So when it comes to replicating the feel of riding outside, so one thing that helps with this is the weight of the flywheel, where this helps simulate the inertia that we'd feel like when we're riding outdoors. And this has an 11.9 pound or 5.4 kilogram flywheel, which is plenty heavy enough to recreate that inertia. There's definitely other trainers out there with heavier flywheels, but I think it'd be really hard pressed to say that those heavier flywheels create a much different experience than this. This is actually really great. And then in terms of stability, well, this is vastly improved from the original, and this is not only due to more surface area on the bottom of the trainer, but also changes with the orientation of the legs themselves. And this is actually one of the few complaints I had about the original. So with the original, the legs were positioned in a way which made the entire trainer offset when you mounted your bike. It actually wasn't centered over the leg. So on really hard sprints, you could potentially tip the trainer a little bit on the right-hand side. I mean, I think it'd still be pretty challenging to completely tip over on the original, but on really hard sprints, I definitely could feel it leaning to the right from time to time. But with the Core 2, well, they've solved that. So now when your bike is mounted, it's actually centered on the trainer. And speaking of sprints and resistance, so the Core 2 has a max resistance of 1800 watts, which is a ton, by the way. So like for me, I'm a pretty experienced cyclist, and I can maybe put out like 1200 watts for like 5 seconds at most. So if you're putting out more than 1800 watts, well, you're a beast. And then in terms of replicating grades, so this can replicate up to a 16% grade, which again is quite a bit. And there's really only a few points in some certain games, like let's say Zwift, where you'll actually get over 16%. And in terms of movement and stability, so it's a really stable trainer like we just talked about earlier. So on really hard sprints, you're not going to feel this thing moving around at all. But in terms of the built-in movement, so it doesn't have any built-in movement like their KICKR V6 or their KICKR Move. So that built-in movement basically can help with fatigue for longer rides. And then in terms of sound, so this is going to be basically a virtually silent trainer. All right, so here's a sound check of the KICKR Core 2 with the Zwift cog installed. So just for a baseline, you can hear my pedals click in here. Sorry, maybe a little bit loud. So the trainer itself is going to be, essentially silent. What you're going to be hearing really is going to be the sound of whatever chain you have on the cog. And this is a 12-speed flat top SRAM chain that I have on here. But basically that's all you're going to really hear is the sound of your chain on the cog. The trainer itself is quiet. So even at higher speeds, higher flywheel speeds, silent. Higher wattages. It's a very, very quiet experience for sure. And then when it comes to the experience using Zwift virtual shifting, well, I think virtual shifting has been a fantastic invention when it comes to direct drive bike trainers, where it provides a nice, smooth, responsive experience, but it also actually solves a few issues. So let's say you have a traditional drivetrain with cassette in the back and more than one chainring up front. Well, you can't necessarily use all your gears. So if you happen to have your chain on the biggest chainring up front and the largest cog in the back, so that's going to be a cross chain, and you may hear a little bit of grinding, and it's not going to be really that smooth. With the Zwift cog version, well, that's not going to happen. And the other thing virtual shifting helps with are going to be bikes with single chainrings up front, where your gear spread is basically limited to how many gears you have on your cog in the back. With the virtual shifting, you basically have a huge gear spread to choose from, and you can even choose from different shifting styles. But for me, when it comes to just hopping on my bike and going for a ride, I think the Zwift virtual shifting experience with the Core 2 is really, really great. Now, when it comes to structured workouts with erg mode based platforms, so this is going to be a little bit more nuanced here with how our trainer reacts, where with erg mode based platforms, so let's say with some workouts, you'll be set at like 120 watts, and then your next step is 300 watts. Well, you don't necessarily want the trainer to immediately change to 300 watts. And the reason for this is, well, your knees. So there's a little bit of nuance here in how a trainer actually changes that resistance, where you want it to be smooth enough where you don't necessarily blow out your knees, but you also don't want it to be too slow where you're missing out on some of that interval. And the Core 2 provides a good experience in that department, where just like the original, it usually takes around like 2 to 3 seconds for big changes in resistance right there, which is usually what I like to see. Now, when it comes to power accuracy, so the Core 2 has a claimed power accuracy of plus or minus 2%. And this is something that I found kind of interesting during the course of my testing. So when I first got my unit on the first couple of rides, it was reporting a little bit lower than what I was expecting. Now, there's different areas where you can measure power. So that's going to be from the pedals, the cranks, as well as the trainer. And the numbers can be slightly different between these. And this is just due to where it's actually measuring power, where the pedals are the most direct point of contact to your body. So that should be the most accurate measurement. But as you go down the drivetrain, well, there can be a little bit of loss in power just due to all the components there. However, the numbers there were even lower than what I was expecting, accounting for drivetrain loss. Now, about a week before the Core 2 actually launched, so Wahoo said that they were going to be changing how they're going to be calibrating the trainer at the factory for power, and then they sent me an update for me to perform on this Core 2. And then after performing that new calibration, well, numbers were now a lot closer. However, interestingly, now a little bit above the pair of Vivera Asioma pedals I was using as a point of reference. And then I also tested it against a pair of Garmin's new Rally 200 series pedals, which have also proven to be quite accurate. And that was a little bit closer, at least when it came to those pedals. Now, you'll also notice some results from a set of SRAM's forced cranks in there, but I found Quark power meters to run just a little bit high. So for our sake of comparison, we'll be comparing just to the pedals. And for the most part, the power numbers from the Core 2 are nearly the same as the pedals, but on a few occasions a little bit higher, and then on a few occasions a little bit lower. But for the most part, I think they line up really, really well. But looping back to what we were talking about earlier in terms of drivetrain loss and power, where I generally expect a trainer to be a little bit lower than the pedals, well, the numbers are pretty much the same now. And the reason for this is that Wahoo is actually accounting for that drivetrain loss in their algorithm for power measurement. Whether that's right or wrong, well, I'll go ahead and let you discuss that down in the comment section down below, but they basically do match up at least. But what I would say though is that over the course of over 2,000 kilometers, it has remained consistent over time. So I think this definitely is a reliable trainer in that department. Oh, and then one more software related feature I did want to cover here is that they did also add a race mode feature here. So what happens here is that it's going to be transmitting power at 10 times per second versus the normal 1 second recording interval. So this is going to be useful if you're doing a lot of online racing where you'll get a little bit more responsive measurement. Now, we also have to talk about what the Core 2 doesn't have here. And the first thing that we can talk about is the built-in movement, where that's not going to be found on this trainer versus some of their higher end trainers. And it also doesn't have a handle either. So if you're going to be moving it around, it does fold up a little bit, but it doesn't necessarily have the convenience of a handle. And then lastly, although it does now come with Wi-Fi, it doesn't have the connectivity option for a hardwired connection with an Ethernet cable, again, which is found in their higher end trainers. But overall, the Core 2 has been a really good update to the original, and even though this is a budget level direct drive bike trainer, it offers a lot for the money. Like for me, I've been using this as my primary trainer over the last 3 months, other than some time with Wahoo's KICKR Bike Pro, and I've been thoroughly enjoying this. Now, in terms of if you should upgrade from the original KICKR Core, well, I can't necessarily say it's worth the upgrade unless you really want that Wi-Fi or the flatter legs or something like that. Basically, if your original core is working, I'd probably say stick with that until something goes wrong with it. This is more about updating the original and being Wahoo's most current bread and butter budget direct drive bike trainer. That was a whole lot of words, and that took me like 10 takes to say, by the way, but this really is going to be a great option for any of you out there just getting into indoor cycling, as well as plenty of more serious riders out there as well. Anyhow, if you found the information in this video to be useful, do me a favor, just hit that like button down below, and also subscribe to the channel for plenty more sports tech videos just like this that are coming soon. But in the meantime, happy riding, and we will see you in the next video.